Welcome to Motivation Local, a podcast where we discuss how place impacts identity. All of this made possible with support from TELUS STORYHIVE. Lived experience not only shapes how people view a community, but also how they view themselves. Some of these experiences and memories form a narrative about a community. It's at the intersection of this that we seek to explore how these experiences and memories shape individuals. How has their community motivated them? And perhaps how have they motivated their community? I'm Corey Sadlemyer, host of Motivation Local. Our focus this season will be my hometown, Medicine Hat, Alberta. Through a collection of stories, our goal will be to generate an informative sketch about Medicine Hat through the eyes of a small sample of its members. Some of our guests will be born and raised here, some will be former residents that have ventured off to new places, and some will be people who have come to call Medicine Hat home. Each will provide their own reflections on place and identity. Our hope is that this provides you with time to reflect on your hometown, wherever you live. In a story about place, I would be remiss to not acknowledge the land that inspires this show. This coolly carved corridor that intersects what has become Treaty 7 and Treaty 4 land, a meeting place for the Blackfoot and the Cree for centuries, and the home of the Metis as well. Lastly, I would like to emphasize that this podcast is separate from my role at Medicine Hat Public School Division. It is, however, about celebrating the community in which I live and work in, and as with any small community, there will be an intersection of guests and roles that reference my work with the school division. Our guest today is Chasity Cairns. Chasity is the now former manager of Indigenous Engagement and Student Supports at the Medicine Hat College. We'll talk to her more about that qualifier word former in a little bit. But for now, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Really excited to have you on the show. You and I, our paths have crossed a few times here in the last 4 or 5 years on a few different initiatives. I've always appreciated your spirit and candor. And when I was thinking of people to have on the show, I thought, I want to see if Chasity would do this with me. So I'm glad you agreed to do it because it can be a little bit scary sitting here.
Oh yeah, for sure. I'm honored. I'm honored that you asked me. So
I think that's pretty cool too. So I thought we'd just lead off. The podcast itself is about Medicine Hat and the community and how place impacts identity and how people impact that place. But just thought I'd just start off a little bit about having you tell us a little bit about yourself.
About myself?
Yeah.
Well, originally from Manitoba. So moved here. Well, I don't know. I should have calculated that before I came here, but probably I think 16 years I've been in Medicine Hat now, but I've lived in Alberta since I was 18 years old. I moved from Manitoba and from Winnipeg. And so my background is that my dad's family is Ojibwe from Ochi-Chaco Sapi. So he's First Nations, my one side of the family, and then my mom's family are Métis. And so 2 different cultures. And so I kind of grew up with a little bit of both of those worlds, which kind of brought me into the positions that I've had here in the city and supporting different populations in the community and specifically Indigenous. And so, yeah, and I'm raised 2 of my daughters here, and I still have 1 more to go. And one daughter graduated from Hat High, and then the other graduated from McCoy. And so yeah, Medicine Hat was good to me. And now it's that time where it's transition. So, yeah.
So Manitoba background, singing the Wob Canoe stuff must be super interesting and exciting.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, Wob Canoe. I actually, back in the day, I always brag about that I was a part of the Aboriginal Youth Justice Symposium when I was 15 years old, and 1,500 youth across the province of Manitoba, our Indigenous youth specifically, came across, and then we attended workshops, and at every workshop, everybody voted for the youth they wanted to represent for the province in front of the politicians. And I ended up being one of those four out of the 1,500
Wow.
youth, and Wabkanu was sitting right there. And
Really?
yeah, it was pretty exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, back in the day. So
Paths crossed a long time ago.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
paths crossed long time ago. And I have a lot of family that's involved with a lot of big Indigenous initiatives in Manitoba right now, with murdered and missing Indigenous women and education, First Nations education. My mom's a teacher, principal now.
Okay.
Looking for retirement here
Yeah.
any day now. And she's always taught on reserve.
Yeah.
And so it's definitely a different world than what it would be here in Medicine Hat.
Wow.
Yeah.
When I was doing some research, there was a mention about CBC doing a story about your family and baseball or something.
Yeah, actually. So my maiden name is McKay, and so my dad's family, that's like, my dad's side is McKay, and so there's 12 kids in his family, 9 boys and 3 girls. So a lot of Métis families, First Nations families were big back in the day, because part of that was residential school effects of Catholic families. And so obviously back in those days, they didn't believe in birth control. So they all had big families.
Right.
And so, small community at Crane River. And my grandfather is like, what do you do with 9 boys with nothing in this community?
Baseball team.
That's exactly what he did. He created a baseball team, and then they named it McKay United.
Yeah.
And they, in the 80s, they were pretty famous, and because it was kind of unheard of, Indigenous family, to do what they did, right?
Yeah.
And they were really good, and they won. They played in the Canadian Native Fastball Championships. They won, I don't know how many years in a row. Wow. They went all the way to Albuquerque, New Mexico,
Really?
all across the Canada, played ball in all these reserves. And so CBC heard about this, and so then they followed my family during one whole summer.
Really?
And I can't remember, I don't know if it was Peter Pockington or it was a famous media guy that he did a documentary on her family, and it ended up winning some kind of award in New York.
Wow.
In regards to it, because they were all family members, and then they were inducted into the Manitoba Softball Hall of Fame in 1992. Yeah.
Wow. That's super neat.
Yeah, I know, right? So needless to say, I have about 100 first cousins and from all across Canada.
Yeah.
So I have a big family.
Yeah.
And so that was how I grew up. I always said to my kids, I didn't need friends. I had first cousins.
Right.
Because our summers were like, a lot of my uncles were teachers, because they had the summers off and they were able to play ball. And so like all of us kids were on the ball diamond all summer watching our dads play ball. And that's pretty much a lot of my childhood was there. And yeah, it was pretty amazing.
I can relate to that. My mom comes from a family of 11.
Oh, really?
And so lots of first cousins, and then lots of cousins that eventually you lose track of what everyone's name even is anymore, right? But you're like, your cousins were your friends, right? Because you spend so much time together. And
it's definitely intergenerationally, it's changed a lot, right? Because I feel like, I remember doing this assignment in school when I was doing my social work degree, and it was about like developmental and how like intergenerationally effects of families. And that was one of the things. It was like 12 kids to like 3 kids from one generation to the other. It just kept getting smaller. And it was kind of eye-opener, because my kids don't have the same. They're lucky, to even, they have no cousins that are their age. So very different
for sure
upbringing.
So came to Medicine Hat 16 or so years ago. What's one of your first memories of Medicine Hat?
Well, the teepee, to be honest with you, when I first moved here, I was like, where's all the Indigenous people? Because we had the biggest teepee, right?
Right.
And
did you, coming from outside of Medicine Hat, did you assume then that if there was a giant teepee in Medicine Hat, that must mean there must be a lot of First Nations
I know,
people.
that's what I thought. Yeah, and I actually joked, I teased my dad. I said, geez, you're going to stand out here. Because my dad is First Nations looking. And I was like, no, there's not a lot of First Nations people. But later on, working in the community, I found most of us were Métis. So, the population was there. It's just that it wasn't as visible because a lot of us are light-skinned. And so there's the history in Medicine Hat with Saratoga Park, and a lot of the families that are here, that live here, are Métis. And that is the history of Medicine Hat for Indigenous, is that a lot of the most cities you go to, there's reserves around that city, right? But we don't have that.
Right.
And so so that obviously affects Medicine Hat. And that's kind of the history of here, is they never settled here. They came here to have their winter camps, and they never settled here. So,
So that, I often wondered if it was almost to our disadvantage to not have some sort of settlement that stood out in a larger way, because we didn't really have that connection, like the connection that Lethbridge has to.
No.
Because I found when I started doing the work that I was doing, going like, I don't know who to just naturally connect with, and eventually I figured that out, but not in the way that you would in other communities. And I remember when we hired Daryl, we interviewed a person from Meadow Lake, and he kept referring to Medicine Hat as a settler community, and I didn't truly even understand what that meant. And now I fully get it. What a settler community is. And in some ways I feel like we're at a disadvantage because of that. But I think some of the work that's happened, and people, like a variety of things that we do in our community has really started to change that, I think. Oh
yeah, for sure. Reconciliation is definitely on the table now everywhere. So I don't think it was when I first moved here. Like, I even remember when I registered my daughters, and with School District 76 and George Davison, and my daughters, they didn't even want to identify as Indigenous because they didn't want to stand out, right? And I always talk about that because a lot of people don't want to identify. And so, but I feel like now we're at a place where, because we have so much more support, that people are coming out now and identifying. They want to be, they feel proud, right, to be Indigenous, and because there's things happening now, right?
For sure.
There's cultural programming and things like that. But when I moved here 16 years ago, I tried connecting with Meosin, but even then, there wasn't a lot, because when I grew up in Manitoba, it was everywhere, right? I just grew up dancing, square dancing, jigging. It was just the norm how to dance, and even pow dance. I used to fancy shawl dance, and it was just around me all the time. And I know I still notice that when I go home. I almost I feel grounded when I go home every summer to visit. Is that it still feels like home, but there's a reason why I moved to Alberta, right? And so that's a lot of Indigenous people that live here. There's a reason why they live here. It's because it's a beautiful city, and our communities are hurting. We're still dealing with a lot of residential school effects, and what does that look like in our communities? And my community right now, they don't even have clean drinking water. So I just, we're so lucky to live in the city and have all of the amenities we do, and and the medicine hat advantage.
You were moving away. You could run for office.
I know, right?
So what brought you to Medicine Hat?
Well, it was my previous marriage, and so he worked for water and wastewater. So his job, we had to move city because there's only one water treatment plant, right? So we actually were living in Grand Prairie, and then we thought, oh, we'll move down south. And I wanted to be a stay-at-home mom because I thought at that time I was having my last child, so I wanted to enjoy her, and so it was cheap to move here, right? Compared to Grand Prairie, it was booming with oil and expensive housing, and we were able to live on one income at one point. Mm-hmm. And then I got bored at home, and then I got a job with Children's Services, and I have 10 years of service with the government of Alberta there. So, 6 years down south here, and southeast, and then I had in the north 4 years, and so I started working with Children's Services, and then,
And then did you go from there to Meewassa?
No, I actually ended up going to back to school because I like I always talk about that, like working for Children's Services, that I was at admin support, right? And so I was at the maximum level of what I can do, and I didn't want to manage, right? So the only way I could be is a supervisor. I was like, no way I'm supervising people. I'm not supervising people. This is not what I do. So I'm going back to school. I always wanted to be a social worker, and wanted to help because I seen how our people were discriminated and the racism in that system. And I couldn't help, right? And so the only way that I can help is if I went back to school. And so that's what I did. I ended up went to school to Medicine Hat College for 2 years, got my diploma, and then I did my degree through U of C. I think I was one of the last learning circles cohort that they had before they went virtual. So I was lucky. And then out of my practicum, I ended up working. I said I would never work for Metis Friendship Center. I'm not working with Indigenous because I was so passionate. And I knew that, and it affected me. I always wanted better for our people, because I lived through it. I've had those experiences. I've seen it. Because a lot of our people haven't been raised with their culture. A lot of people have been adopted or brought up in the system, and they didn't have that connection. And so, but when I was going to school, Truth and Reconciliation call to actions were just being released. And so that was everywhere. And I just listening to, I went to conferences and listening to the commissioners talk about all of what was happening, and it just fueled my fire. And then I ended up getting a practicum at Metis, and next thing you know, I'm writing my own contract for my own job to give myself a job to work there, and I ended up spearheading basically a lot of the programs that are running there today. So cultural addictions. And then what I realized working with cultural addictions was that I would say 80% of the families that had an addiction had involvement with Children's Services or were a child of the system. And so I started to see themes, and those themes were that disconnect from family, not having a family, identity, right? Because they were raised in a system, they, it can be complicated to apply for your First Nations card or your Métis card. And a lot of support is dependent on having that card. You can't just identify, they want proof, And so because of that, then I started creating the parent caregiver education program, and because a lot of the programs that were run in the city were non-indigenous organizations, and what evidence-based research was saying and what the elders were saying is we need to bring back our culture, because our culture is prevention and intervention. And because of that's what was lost. That's
Right.
what's going to make us feel whole, is that connection with our identity and who we are as Indigenous people. And then so anyway, so that's a lot of the culture that, I started trying to bring back, like ceremonies, and then healing for those parents. And then what I found was like the court system, they wanted paper, right? They wanted courses. They wanted a complete course. I attended so-and-so. But what I knew our people needed was Indigenous-based programming, right? Why are we raised with alcoholic fathers or mothers? There's a lot of pain that's there stems from what happened in residential school for 7 generations, right? And a lot of our people didn't understand that. And so I created programs so that what they needed to get their kids back, and the knowledge they needed, the skills they needed to be a healthy parent. And then, but what happened was they had multiple children, not just one. And so then we needed a children's program. So in order for parents to come to programming, we needed to create a children's program. Yeah. And then so at that time, the executive director, we didn't even have funding, and we just knew we needed to do it. And we needed to expand because Meowson was out of space. And so there was a space. It was funny because that's when Tim Hortons was still on 3rd Street.
Right.
It was empty. They moved out, and then there was that space. And then I was walking, where am I going to find a space for this children's program? It has to be close so I could teach the parent program. And so here there was a sign right across the street, and I'm like, what? So next, Jeanette's like, well, find out how much is it? And then because their mortgage was up, so they could afford it. And so we didn't even have funding. So we ended up opening up a children's program so that we could run those parenting programs for the parents. And a lot of that was working with the justice system and children's services, and just kids were getting the 0 to 6 kids were getting that early learning, but Indigenous focused programming that they needed. So they would make air fried bannock. It was a healthier, but they got to play. It was like sensory, and they did a lot of fun little things with them. And I missed that because they would come in, auntie. So I was an auntie to so many families.
You got a whole bunch of new relatives.
Yeah, I got a whole new and I still see them today, and I'm like, oh, you're so big. And, and so with that, crisis intervention, because there was always, everything's always, right away, and the crisis, because mental health was an issue too, right, at the time. And so, so like everything kind of was interrelated, even though the programs were specific populations, but, social issues that people were experiencing were very complex. Yeah. But there was no programming. And so that was always the key, right? And we all had those connections. And so and then at the end of it, the college kept saying, I could say this now, but they kept saying they were getting their new space. And so Meowson supported that with the new space, because the only stats that you can get at that point was from Meowson, because nobody kept Indigenous stats. Like, what is our population? Right. Who is the people that are living here in Medicine Hat? And so I remember sending those over because they were applying for funding for their new expansion. And I remember sitting with Jeanette, what does this new space need? And, so we had those meetings and looking at the blueprints, and, I was so excited because we really did need the space. Because a lot of the programming, we would max out at 15. We didn't even have to advertise. Yeah. Because we just knew that many people that could attend, right? Yeah. And yeah, so basically, the new space happened and they said, "Oh, you're going to come and work for us." And I'm like, "Hell no, I'm not going work for government again, because
Yeah.
that's basically like government working for post-secondary, and I'm doing such good work in community. I
Mhm.
don't want to, I was at that point a program manager,
So
and
managing people?
yeah, that's the funny thing. Yeah, I don't like to think about it that way. I was
Yeah.
just more managing programs and
Yeah.
making sure that people had what they needed in community and their connections to their culture. And so and then so anyways, we had a lot of loss in the community. With COVID, after COVID, like when you're dealing with people with addictions, they need connection,
Yeah.
and we weren't connected. There's no way, and then especially with our culture, it's all about connection, and it was a tough time. And I was working frontline. There was a lot of us that were still working frontline, tried to provide programming, and but unfortunately, we had a lot of loss, and my heart couldn't take it.
Mhm.
And I had 3 losses, I think, and 2 months. One was a murder. I wasn't in Medicine Hat, but I was part of that, connected with that family with children's services, and then one was an overdose, and one was a suicide. So I was like, okay, I think I need something different, and I thought, well, this is a great opportunity. I will apply then, because they
Yeah.
asked me, I think, 5 times to apply for that job, and I was like, I don't know. And but it was a great opportunity because I was the first in the position. It was a brand new position. They had a brand new Indigenous strategy plan, brand new beautiful space that was not built when I got there, but it
Yeah.
was almost ready. And yeah, so now I think now that I'm leaving, I feel like I left my mark there.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful space, Umaksipita, which means big eagle. The story of Umaksipita, the walls there now, it tells the story of why it's named a Blackfoot, name, and then the history behind that, and all of the events, the craft circles, community came in, um, 40 to 45 people every craft circle.
Yeah. It's it's such a great space, right? Like
Oh,
yeah. Yeah.
we were filling it up, and
Yeah.
like the president said before I left, he's like, "Wow," he said, "the first year we had our convocation, we had it in the Crowfoot room. The second year convocation we had, since I've been there, in the new space, Humaxi Pizza, and this year, we had it in the cafeteria. So if they keep increasing, then I
Mhm.
said it's gonna have to go in the gym,
Yes.
because
Yeah.
our grad rates increased more than double every year
Right.
since we got that space.
Well, people can see themselves.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they feel
Yeah.
safe, right?
Yeah.
There's a community now,
Mhm.
you know. Before, like I said, when I first moved here, where was the community? We
Mhm.
had the big teepee, but
Right.
where was all the natives,
That's
right?
that some Italian guy bought
Yeah,
and brought here.
Italian. Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
yeah, and so now, like, I feel like, there's community now. Everybody's connected. I think that was one of the things that I was most proud of when I was at the college, was that in all of our events, the round dance, like all of those were for community. It wasn't just for students, because what I found was a lot of our indigenous population here are from somewhere else. We're not from here,
Yeah.
right? If you have a table of indigenous people, they'll say, "I'm from Manitoba, I'm from Saskatchewan, I'm from BC, I'm from Northern Alberta."
Yeah.
They're not from here.
Yeah.
And what that says is that we don't have natural supports, you know, we don't have family. And, when I talked about, growing up with all this family, I was lucky, to have so many first cousins, that I didn't have to lean on. I had family, but most of the people that live here, they don't. And so that's why it's so important for community organizations to create that space, those Indigenous spaces, because then they have a safe place to be themselves. Because at one point in, and it still is, I say, people are scared to say, oh, I'm Métis,
Right.
or I'm First Nations, or I'm Cree, or they don't even know, right? And having those spaces, it creates community, it creates a safe place, it creates a place where people can feel them who they are, and it's okay to be who they are, and that other people care and understand and, tell their story or learn together, because we're all learning, even non-indigenous people come. It's a great place to come and learn, and even international. A lot of international people came to a lot of our programming this year. Yeah.
You think about lots of people are from elsewhere that are here. And for yourself, when you think about your own hometown or your own original place, what's something about that community that you miss that you wish was here?
That's what I was trying to create.
Yeah.
It was the culture, right? Because I like I said, like I grew up square dancing, because that's Métis dance, right? Like Métis square dancing and jigging, and like I always said when I came out of the womb dancing the Red River jig, because I don't remember a time that I didn't know how. Like there's pictures of me dancing Red River. I was 2 years old because I was following my mom and my grandmother because they danced all the time. That was Métis kitchen parties. That was a big thing back in the day. They had the fiddle, they had the guitars going. It was dancing, a good time. It's always a good time to celebrate. And I grew up around that. But then my mom kind of rebelled against that because of the Catholicism, and then she went the First Nations way, and so we ended up doing a lot of ceremonies and things like that, and the healing, because my grandmother was a residential school survivor, and there was a lot of hurt, and a lot of the residential school survivors lost, I guess, a lot of our value systems, our culture, how to parent. Because, when you think of, we talk about early childhood development and, it's the impressionable years of a child. And if all you knew was abuse, how would you be as an adult?
Follow the pattern, right?
Right. Yeah. It follows that pattern. And that's what the kids experienced, right? Yeah. And so growing up with that, my mom found healing with the First Nations culture, Cree specifically. And so I was gifted a name when I was 3 years old, because when she was my mom gave birth to me on her second year of her bachelor's of education. Wow. She tells a story about her teacher coming to give her an exam when she was literally in the delivery room. And my dad basically kindly grabbed him and escorted him out of the room. And my parents were young. My mom was 19 when they had me, but she finished. Yeah. She was the first woman in our family to have an education. And that was like, my grandmother always pushed education on all of us because of that. And because she wasn't allowed to, right? She went to residential school. I think the highest grade she got was grade 7. And that was it. And so she wanted her daughters to have an education, have more in their life. And so my mom finished, and then I got my name, and she did her, I think it's a minor or major. What do you do in education?
Yeah, I get major and minor usually.
Yeah, and she did hers in Native Studies at Brandon University. Yeah. So she did her practicum on Long Plains First Nations or Nations. And an elder gifted me the name Misko Benishi Kwe, which means Red Hawk Woman. So ever since I was like a little girl, 3 years old, I had this First Nations name, even though I was raised Métis. So I always had that connection and went to ceremonies and sun dances and pipe ceremonies and round dances, and brought that healing. So because of my childhood and because of, I know how it helped my mom and our family heal. That's what I tried to provide for Medicine Hat, right? Is, when I seen the families that were hurting, I knew that was what they needed because we didn't have that here.
Yeah.
Like I remember working at Metis and they didn't even have smudging medicines. And I was like, we're an Indigenous organization. We need smudging. That's like basic, right? And so that was the first thing. And then I said, well, we're going to go picking sage. And then we got sweetgrass. And then I started bringing people out to Kainai and Pikani and going to sweat lodges and had 15 passenger van, Metis, and taking people out over there because we didn't have it in the community.
Yeah.
And this, our elders, we have to pay travel,
right?
It's expensive. And we didn't have those, we have elders, but we don't have those healing elders in our community that provide those types of ceremonies. And we really do need that, and that connection, because that really helps the families and it helps our people feel whole, even if you are Métis, like having those like face painting ceremonies when you've had loss. Everybody has loss, people are going through tough times because life is life, right? You have your ups and downs, and so that was literally what I did. Whatever I didn't have, right? Trying to bring back dancing, the beading, capote making. Like we did so many different crafts, like what to learn, and try to educate community because there wasn't enough of us.
Yeah.
We never, and that, right? I think you guys hired almost one person every year already, right?
Right.
And there's just not enough. And so I, doing the education of building allies, right? Educating people on why we are where we are and why we need to do what we do, and having those sometimes uncomfortable conversations, the truth. You can't have reconciliation with truth. And then all of a sudden, we ended up getting all this help, right? And then you can't do it alone. You always need a community, right?
That was really my naive start, was truth and reconciliation, and I read the calls to action, and I go, yeah, well, we can reconciliate. This is, I know how to do that. And then you discover like it's truth and reconciliation, and I can't remember if it was listening to Marie Sinclair or there was a guy from Toronto. Forgetting his name right now, but he said, like, we got to hang out around the truth for a while, and we need to understand the truth before you can get to the end reconciliation part. And that one really stuck with me. That like people need to know the truth, and I think as you start to understand that, and you understand how to sit with that, and how to engage in conversations, and how to find the right people, and how to sit at the table, that all of those things it starts to make change, I think.
Yeah. It's difficult. And it's very difficult because one of the big things is we're so diverse as people, right? And so and Medicine Hat, I think, is well, we know this because we're border town, right? Our treaties, Treaty 4, Treaty 7. And what does that mean?
There, yeah.
Right? And so what does that mean, right? And so that means there's a whole lot of people. But our people didn't work on borders. That's colonization, right? And so, when we do land acknowledgements, we recognize these treaties that were broken promises. So First Nations people look at that as like, who is this for? Is it for you or is it for us, right? And so that's why, it's important to recognize, when I educate people in the community, I always tell, like, even students, they're going to be professionals. You're not going to live here in Medicine Hat. You're going to go work somewhere else. What does your land acknowledgement say? Those are the people you need to connect with, right? It's not the treaties. It's and it's same with identity. With people, and they ask, like, they want their card, right? What community do they belong to? And it's not about that. It's about, am I Cree? Am I Blackfoot? Am I Métis? Because that tells you what to learn. What language is my original language to speak? What is the protocol of our culture, right? Because there's different, like Cree and Blackfoot, they're total opposite. They might both have teepees, but their teepees are going to look different, and how they're set up are different.
Yeah,
And you
I've
know
learned
this
that.
now. Very different.
Yeah.
One has 3 poles in the beginning, and one has 4 poles. One paints them, one doesn't. What about the ceremony and how protocol on gifting and like asking an elder to come in? Very different on what you're going to give that elder. If you go to a feast, that's how that ceremony is run is going to be very different. They do the same things, but how they do it is going to be different. And so that's what's important for people to learn, and that's important for even Indigenous people to know. It's not about the card, because cards are colonization, right? And we didn't have cards in the 1800s. They knew what community they were from. They knew who their grandmothers were. But a lot of our people don't, because of, the 7 years of residential schools, 60s scoop, millennial scoop, the children's service system now still, I think, what did it say, 73% this year of the foster care system is Indigenous kids.
Wow.
And, like Murray Sinclair said, we had Murray Sinclair down for a Journey Towards Healing and Reconciliation conference. Well, it was actually online. And one of the questions the lady, I think it was Stephanie Harp, asked him was, how are people going to heal? And he said it was our art and music was going to heal our people. And he said it might take 7 generations for us to get back. But he said, residential schools hasn't gone away. The new monster is in the children's services, right? Child welfare system. So, moving forward, I think, as a community, whether you work for the school system or, you're working for a community organization, it's important for people to realize that, right? Because, we do a lot of education on Indigenous history or like staff development and things like that. But a lot of Indigenous people aren't even aware of it themselves. Yeah.
So you had you kind of had a goodbye post that was about, I think it's something like lots of decolonization and indigenization. And you've highlighted lots of things here for sure. But what maybe 2 paths here. What would be something you'd be most proud of that you've done, or where you've seen the most growth in the community?
Oh, geez. The most growth. That's a hard one. I don't know. Like, I feel like all of it has been. I'm proud of everything. I feel like Medicine Hat has a long ways to go yet. I think, honestly, we're just starting these conversations, I'd like to see the city take on more as a city, because we're on Indigenous territory. And, they our city is very proud of the Indigenous history,
got a story behind his name.
The story, you know, the headdress, right? The man on the headdress, even Medicine Hat News, right? Like it's everywhere, but people don't understand why, right? And it's important to understand the stories behind those things. So I feel like, you know, I feel like we have still a lot to do, even though we've started things like sharing our culture, you know, good teaching, sharing good teachings. You know, all the craft circles that we've implemented at the college monthly has created a community. I've heard from community organizations saying that there's a shift in the community ever since we started those craft circles. And then I think, you know, bringing the round dance back, because before we never had a round dance. Like that's a tradition, that's a ceremony. You know, and a lot of the things we've done in the past were just like, I don't know if tokenism is the right word, but it's like a little checkbox, right? And there's feast, there's pipe ceremony behind those round dances. And, you know, it's not just playing one song or two songs and everybody dances in a circle. There's purpose behind and meaning behind those ceremonies and why we do those. I think that was a huge thing because we've had our second annual round dance at the college that's for the community, and you know, hundreds of people came out to that from all over the place. You know, we've had drummers that came actually all the way from Montana.
Wow.
Yeah, like it's pretty amazing. You know, and the conferences that we've hosted, the programs that are still running at Meowson. You know, I still see people in the community and, are you coming back? Come and teach Wellbriety. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm moving, you know, and I feel so sad because like I always have that connection with Medicine Hat. You know, it was a home for me for such a long time. My childhood was always moving. You know, some school years I'd have 7 schools I'd go to in one school year. So I never had stability. And so like that, as a parent, I wanted to break that cycle and I wanted my kids to grow roots somewhere and grow up with friends and be able to play sports with their friends and do those types of things. And Medicine Hat did that, you know, like it was a great community. My kids had a wonderful upbringing here and created long-term friendships. But I think, I don't know, I can't say there's one thing. I think I definitely left my mark. Yeah. And I think people will probably miss me at the table.
We'll zoom in.
Table at meetings. Yeah. They'll probably go a lot faster. Yeah.
What do you... I know your youngest is still in school, but your other kids went through school here. What do you think they would say was the best thing about living or being in Medicine Hat?
I don't know. I'm leaving my one daughter behind, actually. Okay. She's still staying here. She's going to the college. She's actually following my footsteps. She's taking social work. And Medicine Hat is aware of her being here because they're calling her Chasity 2.0. Oh. And but she's not as feisty as me. So but she's actually going to school to be a lawyer. She's doing social work and then she wants to become a lawyer. So I don't know. I think, you know, they had a lot of good friendships, I think, over the past, and they had a really healthy upbringing, you know, connection. I think, you know, the size, the beauty of the city, you know, I don't know what they would say.
You hinted a few times that you're moving. And off to bigger and better things, or managing more people, which I know it's weird. I think when we were talking before, you said something like you might have like 11 staff members or something like that, or
9 to 11. So this is what they told me. So like when I asked them, and I think my eyes went, what?
Yeah.
what? And so 9 staff, and then I'm supposed to be hiring 2 others apparently. And so I think they said officially there'll be 11 staff across the province that I'll be in charge of.
But now you're sitting at I go back to that start when we talked about Wap Canoe and being now suddenly there's Chasity at some of the provincial tables. And
Yeah.
so what is the work you'll be doing there?
Well, I'm going to be working in housing. So like housing was like when I said when I first started, I worked for cultural addictions, and that was my funder was Medicine Hat Community Housing. So I worked with homeless population and whatnot. And so, and then I was on the Medicine Hat Community Council of Homelessness in Medicine Hat. So I was sitting on that board our committee for a while this past year, just trying to stay connected with community and, because working post-secondary, you're in a whole different world. And it was always in my heart. And so when I applied at a lot of different places, and Medicine Hat, or no, not Medicine Hat. See, Medicine Hat's in my mind, but Métis Capital Housing is where I'll be going as program manager. So they support not just Métis. They started off for just Métis, but it's for Métis, First Nations and Inuit can apply for any of their housing. So even in Medicine Hat, they own 12 houses here.
Okay.
And so there's different sites all throughout Alberta, like Calgary, Edmonton. There's, I think, seven different sites. I'll get to know that when I get into my new job.
Yeah.
But so it's going to be, I'll be working with housing initiatives, overseeing how those are rolling out with funding. They own housing, but then they're creating more housing because there's the need, right? We're the fastest growing population in Canada, right, as Indigenous people. And so
And a lot of people don't know that, right?
no,
Yeah.
they don't know that. And so like Medicine Hat, we've increased a lot.
Yeah.
I think I was talking to Daryl, and he said there was like 600 and some kids now with
Right.
School District 76. And I remember at one point it was only like 200
Yeah,
or
it's double for sure.
more than double
Yeah.
in like a span of like 5 years, right? And so like our population's increasing, so which means that we're going to need more support. And so, I've always been a strong advocate ever since I was a youth, because I grew up with my grandfathers were the presidents of their Métis locals. So Métis people are very political. They're very passionate, because we've always had to be, we weren't actually recognized as Métis until 1982 in the Constitution, right? And so we're always fighting, like Louverture, just to, for our people. And so saying that, moving forward is that, sitting at those tables is kind of a dream come true for me, because I think if anybody that knows me, I'm going to say it.
Yeah.
And because, like you can't have reconciliation without truth. And, sometimes it's uncomfortable. And, but that's how change happens, right? Is, you get thinking, whoa, there's a different way of doing things. And, this is what's happening in community, and this is what we need to do. Can we work together to make this happen? And I feel like not enough of our people are vocal enough. And I always try to empower people to have their voice, because we haven't had a voice for such a long time. And we need to have a voice, because our voice is important. We're the original people of this land that everybody lives on. Our ancestors were here before everybody else, and we had a beautiful culture. We had a beautiful way of life. We didn't have pollution. We didn't have broken families. We didn't have alcohol or drugs. Those were all created and brought over, and not from our people. And I feel like, we talk about like water and all of these things that are so important for us to live as human beings.
Yep.
You know, if we listen to Indigenous people, then
There's solutions there.
there's solutions, you know, and I feel like, you know, it's important for us to be at those tables, to be at a table, you know, and there's not enough of us that are educated and have those teachings. They're far and few. And, you know, and that's kind of why I went to the college in the beginning, because that was the thing, you know, was applying for, you know, you put out an ad and you hardly had any applicants. We didn't have people applying for the jobs. You create the jobs, you didn't have the people to fill those, and, you know, empowering people to get their education and to have that knowledge system. So being at those tables is important. And then to be at provincial level is a whole different ball game, right? And so like I'm going to take that very seriously and hopefully create some good change that's needed. And, you know, like decolonizing is tough work. You know, it's easy to indigenize, but you're not really indigenizing if you haven't decolonized, right?
And some of the things you don't even realize the root of them, right? You don't even realize that it's a colonial practice, right? Like you mentioned the card thing,
Yeah.
right? And you go to the root of what that is. Yeah, it's not an Indigenous practice,
No.
right? Yeah.
But the systems are dependent on them, right? Like, you know, like for instance, like at the college, to identify people if they don't identify. And a lot of people don't want to identify. And it's important that they do, because then we know they're there.
Yeah.
Right. And if we don't know they're there, then how do we help? And so, and then it helps with resources as well, right? Because stats kind of tell us, you know, our population, how many people are here, which means that we can get more help.
Right.
And like, you know, graduation, I found out that there was a student that, you know, I knew her grandmother, and she was showing me the pictures of her granddaughter who graduated the college. And I was like, I didn't see she had the Indigenous stole, because we indigenize the stoles as well, right? And I said, how come you didn't come to the Indigenous grad? And she said, I didn't know. And I said, well, then and that tells me that your granddaughter didn't identify, because I didn't even know she was there. And so like, that's why I mean, like, it's so important for Indigenous people to identify, and, you know, even like organizations to take those stats, because then we know who is our population that we're serving. You know, like if like say if McMahon or Bridges or community housing ends up having like increase of 40% of Indigenous people, how would they know that if they're not taking the stats? Right. And then, you know, you kind of need to know your community and who you're serving. Yeah.
I've got two questions.
Okay.
2 questions left for you.
Okay.
But we can keep talking. As someone who's moving out of Medicine Hat, what advice do you have for Medicine Hat as you get set to leave?
Oh, geez. Okay. What advice?
Yeah.
I guess for me, I think it's always to keep everything going. I think, you know, like when I'm scared what's going to happen, because I feel like that's a lot of people are like, they're saying, that's what I'm hearing. It's like, what are we going to do now that you're leaving? You know, because I kind of was a push, like a shaker. And I feel like that's what I would like is to see is that, you know, the reconciliation still happen, you know, like the conversation still flowing, you know, organizations, you know, making those Indigenous spaces, you know, like, can you smudge indoors, right? I think that's so important, you know, like, because that's indigenizing, right? That's, for me, that's decolonizing. You know, if you say to Indigenous, you know, person, you can't smudge in here, what is that saying? You got to go outside. Your culture's not welcomed here. Right. And so, because that's like, there's so much scientific evidence that supports how our medicines heal and like actually removes bacteria in the air. Like we believe it removes negative energy.
Right.
And it cleanses negative energy. When you think of people that have anxiety and depression or anything like that, when you smudge and then afterwards it's like relaxation. I think when we did it grade 4 class, and we asked the kids after they smudged, and they said, I just asked them, how do you feel now? Relaxed. I want to go to sleep. That's what they said, and kids are so honest.
Yeah.
And I said, exactly, right? So when you think of like before a test, everyone has anxiety, test anxiety, like that's always the thing, and you get stressed out. Come and smudge, have a space that somebody can have that smudge. To me, that's reconciliation, because you're incorporating something that is not Western culture. You're incorporating something that is indigenous.
Yeah, and there might be indigenous kids that want to take advantage of that first, right?
Right.
But
It's
other kids might see the value of that. Yeah.
And that's, like with anything, evidence-based research, there's always a new thing that comes out, right? This is a new framework or, thing that works, and then everybody's doing it, and then everybody puts it in their policy, right? Well, this is something that's done for tens of thousands of years, right? Tens of thousands of years.
We're doing it just because it's fun.
No.
Right.
Yeah. And that we know that it helps.
Yeah.
Why can't we do that inside? And I think, I think for organizations, schools, like on First Nations communities, heck yeah, you can smudge, but here, I like in my mom's community, they're going back to land-based education, land-based teachings, like that's science, right? Yeah. And I didn't know that, because I was at the college, and the new VP, she's got a science background. I was like, science. I think that was my worst subject in school. And so I was like, how am I going to connect with her mom? And she's like, oh my God, my girl, that's land-based teachings. And I'm like, what? Well, yeah, think about it. The sky, the sun, the moon, the plants, the biology, and I was like, I didn't even think of that. Right. It is land-based teachings is science. And so what they were doing is they're teaching kids how to harvest animals and the meanings behind animals, and, like different times of year, and of, when our animals or insects do, and that tells you things of the land. And I was like, they were bringing in a moose, and they were showing the kids how to harvest that moose in the gym. Wow. And I was like, George is in Manitoba. I don't, yeah. And I was like, I don't think George Davison is nowhere near that, but, but can you imagine the teachings, behind that is like, because what they do with that animal is they feed the whole community, and the whole animal is used. And you think of like, food banks. Yeah. Right. That's the, food bank. You're only allowed 2 things of meat. Right. And, indigenous communities, if you knew how to harvest your own food, you're feeding your community. Right. The kids learn how to give and think of others, and, different things, but not saying that, you guys need to start harvesting moose or deer or anything, but, like there's teachings behind those cultures. And I feel like, for Medicine Hat, going back to your original question, is that, I'd like to see, having to keep creating those safe spaces for Indigenous people, keep learning about the culture, because there's so much to learn. And I always say this to people, because they always have those conversations, say, oh, I remember taking this intro to Indigenous culture, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh, that's great. But, there's so much to learn. I'm Indigenous, I'm 44 years old. And I feel like I'm still at the baby stages. And I've been learning my whole life about our culture and different tribes and teachings. And I still don't know everything. You know, there's so much to learn. And I feel like leaving Medicine Hat, keep an open mind, keep, have your hearts open so that, you're allowing yourself to learn. And then to the Indigenous people, same thing, Firekeepers Women's Society. Keep creating those circles so that the culture stays alive and that it's important that we learn so that we could pass it on to the next generations and then also teach non-Indigenous because that's how we connect. It's such a great way to connect, a beading workshop together, can you thread my needle for me? Because it's so hard to do that, working together, whatever that means. I feel like that's what's important is to move forward and to keep the reconciliation happening. Yeah.
If I had this idea that my last question would be to ask the guest who if I'm going to talk about Medicine Hat, I'm going to talk about community and identity. Who would I need to talk to next? Who would you say I need to reach out to?
Oh my goodness. I have no idea.
Okay, who's one person, not the person, but who's one person I should?
Well, I feel like Carol Surratt at Meowson Friendship Center, I think she's working into the executive director role. They know a lot about at Meowson about culture. I think connecting with the Indigenous people in the community is important. Again, going back to identity, just because we're Indigenous doesn't mean we know everything because we're so diverse, and I, like that's one of the big things that I struggled with being on this territory is I'm not Blackfoot. Yeah. We're in Blackfoot territory.
You got a lot to learn.
Yeah, I had a lot to learn, but I connected with the Blackfoot community and I learned, they gifted me a name. Sawamaki, medicine woman. They gifted me a name. I was like, I already have a name. It's Red Hawk Woman. No, we don't have a word for hawk in our language. And I was like, oh, okay. So then, but apparently I learned that when you work with different First Nations communities, it's okay to get another name because that's the name that their community's giving you. And they gifted me Medicine Woman. And I was like, are you sure? I don't feel like I'm a medicine woman. I'm nowhere near that yet. But, it was such an honor to receive that name. And, but yeah, like because of the connection I made with the Blackfoot community, like I said, I'm Ojibwe and Métis, and I'm from Treaty 2 territory. So I'm from 2 provinces away, but I still learned, I went to Lethbridge, I went to Kainai, I went to Piikani, and I made those connections with the elders. And, they taught me a lot about their culture, and I tried to bring that here because we were on Blackfoot territory, and it's so important, where did Medicine Hat get its name? It came from Blackfoot people. There's a lot of Métis here who is that community, right? So I started going to Métis Nation of Alberta meetings and connecting with that community and learning because Métis here is different than Métis in Manitoba.
For sure, right?
And so I think there's no one person, wherever you are in your organization that you work for or community, our people are diverse that live here. There's a lot of people that are Ojibwe and Cree and people from BC. There's so many different tribes. And so like that kind of tells you what kind of programming you need to do, right? You need to have the diverse training, like not training, but cultural teachings. Yeah. Right? You can't just do one. There's no all one fits in a box, but, going back to that land acknowledgement, we're on Blackfoot territory. They were here before Métis, and that's why we have a Blackfoot name on Medicine Hat College, our new Indigenous space, And I think that's important to honor the original people of the land and get connected with the people of the land, and because they'll guide you. You don't have to know everything. I didn't know everything, but I built those relationships and just ask questions, because I feel like asking questions says that you care and you want to know more, because a lot of people go with the assumption that they know everything, and I don't know everything. And I'm Indigenous, right? So, and I feel like that's why it's so important for people to have an open heart and open mind, because to keep learning, and creating that space to learn, because, we're not perfect either. We can't tell you everything, we have to do it together. That's what reconciliation is. It's everybody.
Well, I'm really excited for you, and gonna miss being at the table with you. You have not only challenging ideas but great ideas too, and so I've been able to benefit from that, and the kids in our school system have been able to benefit from that. And I shared a story with you the other day about how the work that everyone is engaged in. My daughter has gone to volunteer at a powwow in Strathmore. Went up, spent 2 nights at a hotel, did this all on her own, and it's just so enthralled with the work in the community and wanting to learn about it, and that's come from hard work in our community. So thank you for being part of that.
Aw.
Yeah.
That makes me happy.
Yeah. She was, she's at work today. She was like, she was asking who's coming here. And I said, she was the lady at the red dress thing. I go, yeah. Just, well, I wanted to be, can you reschedule her? I go, she's not around too many more days. I gotta get her. So,
yeah, I'm definitely going to miss all the connections, like I'm going to cry, but it's bitter, it's not bittersweet. I say that because, there's so many things I wanted to still do.
Yeah.
But I feel like I did well here. I feel happy with the connections that I made and the things that I've implemented in Metis and Hat, and, and all the people and the relationships that I've built. And everyone keeps saying, let me know if you change your number. I said, no way, I'm changing it to 780 area code. And they're like, quit being so mean. But I was just teasing. Yeah. But, I feel like even though I'm moving, I'm still always going to be connected with Metis and Hat. And so I'm appreciative for all of those, all the years open and open hearts, and even those that weren't. And I hope that everything keeps continuing, and that we don't say goodbye in our culture, right? So, yeah.
Well, really appreciate you doing this. I know there's a big hockey game tonight.
You just reminded me. What time is it?
Well, if puck drops in about 15 minutes.
Okay,
I think we're going to be all right.
Go Oilers, go.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, Chasity.
Yeah, okay. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Motivation Local is produced by Table 4 Productions with the generous support of TELUS STORYHIVE. You can find our episodes on Optik TV, at our website, motivationlocal.com, on our YouTube channel, or wherever you get your podcasts. Our producer is Corey Sadlemyer. Our theme music was composed by Medicine musical artist Snakes and the Riot. As always, thanks for watching or listening to our podcast. If you've enjoyed what you've heard here, don't hesitate to subscribe to our channel or to leave us some feedback.